Hello friends, I am glad you are here tonight, because we are about to drift together into a story that wanders through time, into a world both distant and strangely familiar. The subject may sound simple, but it carries so many hidden details that you might never have considered. Imagine what it was like to grow old in the long stretch of centuries that people call the Middle Ages, in a place where echoes of the Roman Empire still shaped daily life. Before we step into that journey, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? I find it fascinating to imagine people from all corners of the earth, from different hours of the day or night, settling in to hear the same tale, connected through words that quietly move like a river. Now let us sink slowly into the world of those who carried the weight of age in an era that was not gentle, but also not without its comforts. To be old in a medieval version of the Roman Empire meant you carried on your shoulders not only the years but also the memory of great shifts in society. Life was never guaranteed to be long, yet those who did reach their later years held a kind of authority, a living archive of survival, knowledge, and stories passed down. Imagine walking through narrow stone streets where the smell of bread baking mixes with the smoke of hearth fires, where children dart between market stalls, and where the elderly sit just a little slower, leaning on a cane or holding onto the arm of a younger family member. Old age was a complicated stage of life then. On the one hand, it meant frailty, aching bones, dimming eyesight, and the possibility of being seen as less useful in the harsh rhythm of survival. On the other hand, it meant wisdom, respect, and in many households, it meant being the one who taught, who advised, who remembered the old stories of ancestors. You can picture a small house with rough wooden beams, the floor swept clean of dust, and an older man or woman by the fire, surrounded by grandchildren, retelling tales of emperors, of soldiers marching, of harvests that were abundant or ruined by storms. Meals were not grand feasts for most families. For the elderly, food was both comfort and challenge. Bread was the most constant part of the diet, often coarse and heavy, made from barley or rye. Those with weak teeth would soften it in soup or wine, chewing slowly as they savored what they had. Cheese and vegetables added variety, while meat was rare unless a family was wealthy or it was a festival day. Imagine an old man carefully biting into a roasted onion, its sweetness reminding him of better harvests long ago, or a grandmother sipping warm broth slowly because it was easier on her stomach. These details may sound small, but they paint the reality of daily life in an age where the body aged faster, and every meal felt like a gift. Entertainment for the elderly did not look like ours. There were no books within reach for most, except perhaps religious manuscripts guarded in monasteries. Instead, stories were passed by voice, and the elderly were both the keepers and receivers of these stories. Festivals in town squares gave them music, dancing, and the joy of watching the younger generations celebrate while they clapped along from the sidelines. A traveling troupe of actors performing a play might bring laughter, even to wrinkled faces marked by years of hard labor. And of course, religious life offered gatherings, chants, and rituals where old voices joined young ones in echoing prayers through stone chapels lit by flickering candles. But imagine also the burdens of old age in such a time. Without modern medicine, a small infection could become a lasting pain. Joints stiffened, backs bent, and teeth were lost. Remedies were simple: herbal teas, poultices, sometimes strange charms whispered by healers who promised relief. Some worked, others did not. Yet there was always the human resilience that carried them forward. Old people became experts in finding comfort. A warm blanket spun from wool, a quiet corner away from the noisy marketplace, a seat near the fire during long winter nights. Social standing mattered greatly. In families that valued tradition, the elderly held authority. Their words shaped decisions about planting, marriage, or trade. Their advice was respected not because they had read books, but because they had lived and endured. Yet in poorer households, where every pair of hands mattered, an aging parent might become a burden. In such cases, survival instincts clashed with compassion, and not all elders were treated kindly. Still, even in hardship, bonds of blood and memory often held people together. What about daily routines? An old man might wake slowly with the dawn, joints aching as he rose from a straw mattress, the smell of smoke from the hearth already in the air. He would shuffle outside to breathe the cool morning air, maybe greet neighbors with a nod. If his strength allowed, he might help tend to animals, feed chickens, or mend tools while seated, his hands slower but still skilled. An elderly woman might weave cloth, repair garments, or shell peas while humming softly, her work less rushed than the younger women, but steady and dependable. One detail that often surprises us is how connected elders remained to the flow of life. Though they moved slower, they were present in markets, festivals, and even in small councils where community matters were discussed. Their presence carried weight because they had seen more seasons than anyone else. Imagine an old man leaning on his cane, offering a calm word during a dispute, his voice steady despite the tremor of age. And so, being old in that medieval Roman world was both a challenge and an honor. It meant aches and weariness, but also laughter at the antics of grandchildren, warmth in shared meals, and the deep satisfaction of having endured in a world that was often harsh. As we keep moving forward in this story, we will see even more of their lives unfold. How they loved, how they remembered, and how they faced the twilight years in a world without the comforts we now take for granted. When we think about the experience of growing old in that medieval world still shaped by Roman traditions, we often imagine frailty and silence, but in truth their lives were full of sound, smell, and constant movement around them. Even if their bodies grew slower, the rhythm of the town or village never stopped, and old age meant learning how to exist within that unending current. Imagine sitting on a bench along the edge of a bustling marketplace. The air is alive with the cries of merchants selling cloth, pottery, herbs, or salted fish. Children dart between legs, chasing each other, laughing loudly, while dogs bark and pull at scraps. For an elderly man or woman, this could be overwhelming at times, yet it also provided a deep sense of connection. To simply be present in the crowd was a reminder that life flowed on, and that their own story was still tied into the larger one of the community. And yet, beyond the marketplace and the noise, there was a quieter world that belonged to the old. In many households, they were the ones who remained near the hearth most of the day, guarding the fire that cooked the meals and kept the family warm. The fire was more than simple comfort. It was the heart of the home. To tend it meant holding responsibility even in advanced years. Imagine an old woman slowly adding wood to the flames, humming softly, while grandchildren ran in and out, her presence like an anchor in the swirl of movement. She might stir a pot of barley porridge, its scent filling the small room, and though her hands trembled slightly, the family trusted her to keep the food warm and ready. Aging was not the same for everyone. The wealthy elderly, especially in towns influenced by Roman heritage, often had easier lives. They lived in larger houses with tiled floors, perhaps with servants or younger family members who did the heavy labor. These elders could spend more time in contemplation, in conversation, or in listening to music performed in their homes. They could afford softer foods, better fabrics to wear, and occasionally even access to physicians trained in ancient medical texts. But for the poor, old age was harsher. Their homes were smaller, their meals simpler, and their bodies carried the marks of decades of labor in fields or workshops. A bent back was not just a sign of age but of endless work. Plowing, weaving, lifting, or walking long distances day after day. And still, no matter their station, the elderly carried a role as storytellers. They preserved oral history, legends, and family tales that stretched back beyond memory. Imagine a candlelit room, shadows flickering on the walls, and a group of children gathered at the feet of an old grandfather. His voice might be raspy, but his words would carry them into worlds of emperors, battles, and faraway lands. For the children, it was entertainment, but for the adults who overheard, it was also a reminder that the past lived within their walls. An elder could transform a quiet evening into a journey through time simply by recalling events from youth. In many ways, this was their true wealth, the ability to keep memory alive when parchment and ink were rare. The seasons shaped the life of every person, but for the old they were felt most keenly. Winters were especially harsh. Imagine an old man wrapping himself in a heavy wool cloak, sitting close to the fire as the wind howled outside. His hands ached from the cold, even inside, and every movement was stiff. Yet winter also meant family gathered closer together, evenings of shared warmth and storytelling. Summer brought its own challenges. Heat could be exhausting, fields dusty, and markets sweltering, but it also brought the joy of festivals, music in the streets, and long evenings where neighbors sat outside, sipping watered wine, talking until the stars appeared. The elderly often joined these conversations, their words moving slowly, sometimes interrupted by pauses of thought, but always listened to with respect. Religious life was a pillar of their existence, and for elders it carried an even deeper meaning. Churches and chapels were places where they found both community and peace. Imagine an elderly woman, her steps slow, entering a stone church lit by shafts of sunlight through narrow windows. She kneels with effort, whispers prayers, and joins the chants that echo in the vaulted ceiling. For her, this was not just ritual but also preparation for the next life, a comfort against the fears of mortality. For many old people, religion was not abstract. It was a living companion, a source of daily strength. But let us not imagine them as only frail and quiet. Old age did not always mean withdrawal. Some elders continued to work actively, if their bodies allowed. A craftsman might still carve wood, a blacksmith might still sharpen tools, a farmer might still guide oxen in the fields. They may not have had the stamina of youth, but their skill and patience made them valuable. Imagine an old potter, his hands steady as he shaped clay, teaching his grandson the careful pressure needed to form a vessel. The boy's hands trembled with inexperience, while the elders trembled with age, and yet between them, the knowledge flowed like water, binding generations together. Medicine was another curious part of their lives. Without our modern understanding, treatments could feel strange to us. Herbs like sage, rosemary, and thyme were brewed into teas for aching joints. Honey was used on wounds, and garlic was thought to cleanse the body of sickness. Some elders swore by charms, small objects or whispered blessings said to ward off pain. Others relied on midwives or local healers, who passed down recipes for salves and tonics. Whether these worked or not varied, but what mattered was the hope they gave. In villages, it was not unusual to see an old man carrying a small pouch of herbs at his belt, convinced it protected him from illness. And through all of this, there was the subtle presence of memory not just of personal lives, but of the empire itself. Though centuries had passed since the height of Rome, the elderly still lived among its ruins. They walked past crumbling aqueducts, broken columns, or old roads paved with stone. For them, these were not just relics but reminders of continuity. Imagine sitting on a stone bench, running a hand over weathered marble, and telling a grandchild, "This was built by the Romans, long before I was born, and still it stands." In those words, time folded together the personal age of a human life and the great age of a civilization that never fully vanished. So to be elderly in that medieval Roman world was to be both fragile and powerful, vulnerable and respected, dependent yet still a guide. They lived in the balance between past and present, body and spirit, survival and memory. And as we move forward, we will wander deeper into the details of their days, their fears, their joys, their loves, and the quiet strength that made their twilight years both ordinary and remarkable. If we close our eyes for a moment and imagine walking in the sandals of an elder from that medieval Roman world, we can almost feel the rough texture of cobblestones underfoot, hear the echo of voices bouncing off stone walls, and sense the blend of aromas drifting from kitchens, tanneries, and stables. To live old in such a time was to live among constant reminders of labor and endurance. Every street carried sounds of work, the hammer striking iron, the shuffle of carts, the cries of sellers, and the elderly moved through it slower, but with a gaze sharpened by decades of observation. They had seen markets rise and fall, rulers come and go, and they carried an awareness of impermanence that younger people often overlooked. Their clothing told part of the story as well. A younger man might wear a tunic belted tightly at the waist, his stride brisk and energetic, but the older man's tunic hung looser, patched at the elbows and faded by years of use. The cloth itched at times, yet it was familiar like a second skin. Old women wore woolen dresses layered for warmth, their fingers often busy mending tears with steady stitches. Scarves or veils covered thinning hair, and the creases of age framed faces that had smiled, worried, and endured countless seasons. These garments were not fashion statements but signs of survival, each patch a record of years when money was short and hands had to be clever. Family remained the center of their universe. In many homes, the presence of grandparents was not just tradition but necessity. They watched over children while parents worked in fields or shops. They prepared meals, tended gardens, or kept an eye on livestock. Imagine an elderly woman sitting in the doorway of a cottage, shelling beans into a basket, her gaze occasionally lifting to ensure toddlers didn't wander too far. Her voice might be soft, but one call would bring them running back, because her authority, though gentle, carried weight. The young might roll their eyes at her advice, yet in times of crisis they turned to her wisdom without hesitation. Marriage customs also shaped their later years. Some elders had lived long with a single partner, their bond strengthened by decades of shared struggle. Others had outlived spouses, carrying the ache of absence but also the memory of shared laughter. Widows and widowers often lived with children or extended family, their roles shifting but their presence still vital. For some, remarriage even in later years was not unheard of, especially if property or alliances were involved. These unions were practical, yet they also offered companionship to people who still desired warmth and closeness despite gray hair and tired bones. Festivals lit up their lives with color, even when their bodies no longer danced with ease. Feast days honoring saints or marking the harvest drew entire communities together. Imagine an old man seated on a bench at the edge of a square, tapping his cane in rhythm with drums and flutes, smiling faintly as he watched the younger people whirl in circles. He may not have joined the dancing, but his eyes glowed with the recognition of joy. Old women clapped along, shared mugs of ale or watered wine, and gossiped cheerfully. For them, festivals were reminders that despite hardship, there was still beauty, still music, still reasons to celebrate survival. Old age also brought responsibilities within religious communities. Some elders became caretakers of small shrines, tending candles, sweeping floors, or welcoming pilgrims. Others offered counsel, drawing upon years of prayer and reflection. Faith gave shape to their twilight years, not as something abstract but as a rhythm of daily devotion. Morning prayers, evening chants, the ringing of church bells. These framed their days, giving them comfort even as their bodies weakened. Imagine the peace of sitting in a chapel, eyes closed, the sound of chanting surrounding you like a warm blanket. For many elderly, that was not only solace but preparation, a way to ease the path toward whatever lay beyond. And yet, we cannot ignore the hardships. Illness came easily and left slowly, if it left at all. A simple chill could turn deadly, and broken bones rarely healed properly. Some elders bore permanent limps, crooked arms, or scars that reminded them of younger years. Despite this, they adapted. A man with failing sight might still carve wood by touch, relying on muscle memory. A woman with aching knees might work seated, spinning wool into yarn, her hands moving even when her legs could not. Their determination was quiet but profound. Life had taught them to endure, and they continued to do so even when each step was heavy. Relationships with grandchildren often brought the brightest light to their days. Children adored the stories of old, especially the ones filled with strange creatures, distant lands, or clever heroes who tricked their enemies. Grandparents would tell these tales again and again, sometimes embellishing details, sometimes shortening them when tired. For the elders, these moments were more than entertainment. They were legacy. By telling stories, they ensured their lives, their culture, and their history would not vanish when they were gone. Every tale told to a wide-eyed child was a way of planting seeds in the soil of memory. One cannot help but think about the way the landscape itself shaped old age. Many villages and towns were surrounded by fields, forests, and hills. For elders, walking across uneven ground was difficult, yet they still ventured out. Some gathered herbs, others visited neighbors, and some simply sat at the edge of the road, watching travelers pass. Imagine an elderly woman seated on a low wall, her basket half filled with herbs, pausing to greet merchants on their way to the market. Each encounter reminded her that though her own body slowed, the world remained in motion, and she was still part of it. There were also moments of tenderness, of love that defied the years. Old couples might walk slowly together through fields, their hands clasped, steadying each other. They might sit in silence for long stretches, the comfort of presence more important than words. Love in old age was quieter, less fiery, but no less deep. It was seen in shared glances, in the simple act of setting aside a softer piece of bread for a spouse, or in covering them with a cloak during a cold night. These gestures, small to outsiders, carried immense weight for those who had weathered decades together. And through it all, the elderly lived with the awareness of time. They did not measure years the way we do, with calendars on walls and clocks on wrists. Instead, they measured by harvests, by winters survived, by the births of grandchildren, and by the slow fading of their own strength. Every wrinkle, every scar, every tremor in their hands told a story that no book recorded. They were living archives, each person a chapter in the long narrative of the world around them. So when we think of being old in that medieval Roman world, we must see not only the frailty but also the quiet dignity. Their lives were woven into the very fabric of community, family, and tradition. They were not just passive observers of history. They were its keepers, its carriers, its storytellers. And as the years passed, their presence remained a steady reminder that life was not just about speed or strength, but about endurance, wisdom, and the ability to find beauty even in the smallest of daily rituals. Imagine for a moment the long evenings, when daylight faded slowly and the lamps or candles were lit one by one, filling the room with a soft golden glow. For the elderly, these evenings were among the most precious parts of their day. The work was mostly done. The noise of markets and fields had quieted, and families gathered under one roof. The smell of smoke clung to the air, the fire crackled gently, and in that dim light, the elders often found their voice. They might begin with a sigh or a long pause, drawing the attention of children and adults alike. What followed was never just a story. It was a weaving of memory, imagination, and lesson. These tales traveled from generation to generation, sometimes altered, sometimes embellished, but always treasured. To be old meant to be the keeper of those invisible treasures that could not be measured in coins or fields. Food once again played a central role in these nightly gatherings. A shared loaf of bread, a bowl of lentil stew, or even a slice of cheese was passed around. The elderly often ate more slowly than the rest, but they savored each bite. Their teeth were worn, their jaws tired, yet they found ways to soften food, dipping bread into broth, soaking grains until they were easier to chew. For them, meals were not only nourishment but ritual, a chance to sit among family, to listen, and to feel included in the rhythm of daily life. A single cup of watered wine, shared and sipped with care, might warm their body and loosen their tongue, allowing them to drift into memories that would otherwise stay silent. And it was in those memories that glimpses of the empire's long shadow emerged. Some elders remembered their parents speaking of grand structures built in Roman times. Amphitheaters, baths, roads that stretched farther than the eye could see. Though many of these had already fallen into ruin, their presence was felt. Imagine an old man leading a child to a broken archway, his hand resting on the worn stone as he said, "This was here before me, and it will stand long after you." For him, those ruins were not simply stones. They were living proof that life was bigger than any single person. For the child, they were a promise of endurance, and for the elder, they were a reminder that time moved on, whether quickly or slowly. The seasons carved themselves deeply into the lives of the old. Autumn was both blessing and burden. On one hand, it meant harvest, the bustling joy of gathering grains, fruits, and vegetables, storing them for the cold months ahead. On the other hand, it meant the approach of winter, with its biting winds and nights that seemed endless. Elders prepared by layering woolen garments, by sitting closer to fires, and by reminding the younger generation of methods to preserve food and fuel. Winter could be cruel to the aged, yet it was also when their wisdom mattered most. Families listened to their instructions on rationing, on keeping fires alive, on avoiding waste. Their role became vital not through strength of body, but through strength of memory and foresight. Spring carried its own meaning. For the young, it was a season of energy, planting, and running freely through fields. For the elderly, it was gentler, a reminder of cycles they had seen many times. They might walk into gardens and touch the first buds of flowers, smiling quietly as if greeting old friends. Some would say to grandchildren, "When you see blossoms, you know the world is still alive, even after the hardest winter." That lesson was not only about nature, but about life itself. Age taught them that hardships, no matter how heavy, always carried the seed of renewal. The rhythms of prayer tied all these seasons together. Bells marked the hours, and elders often took comfort in these regular sounds. Their days might be less filled with physical labor, but the rhythm of devotion gave their lives a clear structure. Some could be found seated outside chapels, rosaries or prayer beads slipping through their fingers, lips moving silently. Others stayed indoors, whispering prayers while stirring a pot or weaving cloth. Faith did not remove the aches of old bones or the fear of illness, but it wrapped those fears in a sense of purpose. To grow old in that world was to live in constant dialogue with heaven, not in despair, but in the hope of continuity. Neighbors also played an important part in the lives of the elderly. Communities were tight-knit, and though gossip sometimes stung, companionship softened the burden of aging. Old women might gather together to spin wool, their hands moving almost automatically as they traded stories. Old men might sit on benches, leaning heavily on their canes, discussing weather, politics, or the behavior of the younger generation. These conversations were not idle. They were a way of staying connected, of reminding themselves that they were still part of the living fabric of the village or town. The laughter of an old friend, the comfort of a shared complaint. These were small but powerful medicines against loneliness. Yet loneliness still existed. Some elders outlived all their children, or found themselves in homes where younger members were too busy or indifferent. For them, the days stretched longer, and silence felt heavier. A dog, a cat, or even a small bird might become their closest companion. They would talk to animals as if they understood, pouring into them the words they could not share with others. In those moments, the line between hardship and resilience blurred, because even loneliness could be endured when life had taught you that survival required creativity of the heart. And still, there were joys. The sight of grandchildren learning to walk, the smell of fresh bread rising from the oven, the sound of church bells ringing on a clear morning. These were moments of beauty. For the elderly, they mattered more than wealth, more than possessions, because they knew how quickly such moments could vanish. Every smile, every shared meal, every evening of storytelling became a treasure in itself. They had learned, through years of labor and loss, that joy was not found in abundance, but in presence. So, what was it like to be old in that world? It was to be at once vulnerable and respected, tired yet still vital, marked by both sorrow and deep satisfaction. It was to live each day with the awareness that time was limited, but also with the understanding that every moment, no matter how small, carried meaning. The elderly were not merely waiting for the end. They were still living, still teaching, still holding their place in a world that never truly stopped moving. And in that place, their quiet dignity shone as brightly as any torch lit against the night. As the days passed, the elderly moved through life with a rhythm carved by decades of experience, their senses tuned not only to the world around them but also to the echoes of memory. Imagine walking alongside an old man on a cool morning, his breath visible in the air, each step slow but deliberate. He pauses often, resting on a cane or leaning against a stone wall, yet his eyes scan the streets with an acute awareness. He notices the patterns of daily life, the way children run in circles, the familiar gestures of vendors at their stalls, the dogs that weave between legs, and even the faint sound of a blacksmith's hammer ringing far off. To him, every detail is a story, every gesture a thread connecting the past to the present. The care of the body was a constant concern. Joints stiffened, muscles weakened, and eyesight dimmed, making ordinary tasks a challenge. Yet the elderly found ways to adapt. Simple exercises, walking short distances, or stretching with the support of a wall or railing helped maintain mobility. Meals were carefully prepared to be both nourishing and manageable: soft bread, stewed vegetables, and occasional bits of meat. For some, wine or diluted ale eased aches, while herbs like rosemary, thyme, or sage were brewed for medicinal purposes. Remedies were a mix of tradition, observation, and hope, passed down orally through generations. Imagine an elder carefully measuring a handful of dried herbs into boiling water, murmuring instructions to a grandchild watching intently, both learning and preserving knowledge at the same time. Beyond physical care, the mind remained active. Many elderly people were the living libraries of their communities, remembering events, disputes, laws, and tales from decades past. They recalled which families had alliances, which neighbors had debts, which soldiers had marched to battle and returned, or never returned. In the small councils that occasionally met in villages or towns, elders' words were valued, not because they were formally educated, but because they had endured and observed. Their advice guided decisions about land, trade, and festivals. Imagine a gathering in a hall with a stone hearth, where younger men and women lean in to hear the measured words of an old man whose hands tremble, but whose memory is razor-sharp, offering solutions that keep families and communities balanced. Social interaction remained central to their lives. Elders often spent hours seated outside homes or in public squares, observing life in motion, sharing commentary, and offering guidance. Their presence was a stabilizing force, reminding the young that history and tradition mattered. A conversation might begin with the weather, shift to crop yields, and end with a cautionary tale about greed or pride. In these moments, the elderly were teachers, advisors, and companions, shaping the moral and practical understanding of their communities. Their laughter, though quieter, was still present. Their jokes, often subtle and layered with experience, elicited smiles and sometimes genuine amusement. Despite their social engagement, solitude could be profound. Not every elder had family close by. Not every neighbor offered company. For those living alone, the sound of wind through trees, the flicker of firelight, or the companionship of an animal could fill the silence. Some developed rituals to structure their days, rising with the sun, tending small gardens, arranging herbs, or observing the movement of the stars. Others focused on crafts, spinning wool, carving wood, or mending tools, finding both purpose and quiet satisfaction in maintaining a rhythm to life. Even in solitude, they remained part of the larger tapestry, because their work, stories, and presence connected past and future generations. Religion offered both comfort and continuity. Daily prayers, chants, and visits to churches or chapels were not only spiritual acts but social and practical ones. Elders often knew the schedules of services, the prayers for each season, and the small traditions of saints' feast days. In many cases, they guided younger members of the community in ritual observances, teaching both reverence and practical etiquette. Imagine a grandmother kneeling on a worn stone floor, murmuring blessings while lighting a candle, her hands steady despite arthritis, passing the quiet ritual to her grandchildren who watch, fascinated, and unconsciously learning the rhythm of devotion. Festivals punctuated the monotony and offered glimpses of celebration. While the elderly might not dance with the vigor of youth, they enjoyed observing feasts, music, and performances. They smiled at children chasing one another through crowds, clapped along to drums and flutes, and sometimes shared small morsels of food with those seated near them. Their presence lent dignity to these events, a living bridge between the past and the present. Many elders remembered when the same festivals had been smaller, simpler, or more elaborate, and they carried those memories with both pride and nostalgia. Physical environment shaped their lives in profound ways. Houses were modest, often with thick walls of stone or wood, low ceilings, and simple furniture. The elderly learned to arrange their space for comfort, placing chairs near fires, stools in the sunniest corners, and baskets within easy reach. In towns, the uneven cobblestones posed daily challenges. Yet even with canes or limping steps, elders navigated the streets with patience and determination. Gardens and fields offered both sustenance and activity. Many elders tended small plots, planting herbs, vegetables, or flowers, finding in the repetitive work a soothing rhythm and a quiet source of pride. Yet even in their hardships, there was joy. The sound of a grandchild's laughter, the smell of freshly baked bread, the warmth of a shared blanket on a cold evening. These simple pleasures became treasures. Their understanding of time gave them a deep appreciation for such moments. Every conversation, every shared meal, every evening by the fire carried weight, because they knew how quickly moments could pass. In many ways, the elderly lived fully through observation, memory, and quiet participation, experiencing life intensely despite their limitations. And so, old age in the medieval Roman world was a blend of resilience and vulnerability, solitude and connection, hardship and small but profound joys. They were witnesses to centuries, carriers of memory, and participants in the ongoing life of their communities. Their presence, while often subtle, shaped everything around them: the younger generations, the traditions, and even the rhythm of daily existence. They were not merely surviving. They were continuing, enduring, and quietly influencing the world, one measured step at a time. As time unfolded, the elders moved with a rhythm shaped not only by the days and seasons but by the cycles of human life itself. In the streets and courtyards, their presence was like a gentle current, guiding the flow of younger people without overt command, simply through example and accumulated knowledge. Imagine an old man leaning on a carved wooden cane, his shoulders bent from years of labor, yet his eyes alert and observant, noticing the tiniest details that might escape a hurried youth. He sees a child stumble over a stone, a dog sniffing at spilled grains, a merchant arranging wares with precision, and through these small observations, he measures the pulse of the community. His steps may be slow, but his understanding moves faster than most could keep pace with. Daily routines remained a delicate balance between necessity and endurance. Elders woke with the sun, or slightly before it, their bodies no longer springing from straw beds as they once did. Muscles stiffened overnight, joints groaned under the weight of years, yet the day demanded attention. Some walked to the market to fetch supplies, counting each step carefully, adjusting the weight of baskets or leaning on the arms of younger companions. Others stayed at home, tending the fire, preparing food, or mending garments. Each action, no matter how small, was a demonstration of resilience. The elderly were aware that survival was rarely about grand feats. It was about consistency, patience, and the skill to manage everyday tasks without letting the body betray them. Meals continued to anchor their lives. Bread remained the staple, often dense and coarse, accompanied by stews of vegetables and occasional bits of meat, salted fish, or cheese. For some, the taste of roasted herbs or a piece of dried fruit was a rare luxury. Elders learned to adapt their eating habits to their physical needs, soaking bread in broth or wine, chopping food into manageable pieces, and chewing slowly to avoid strain. Eating was not only a practical act but also a social one. Families gathered to share the simple sustenance, and elders often guided younger ones in the distribution, ensuring everyone received enough. Food became a medium for teaching patience, gratitude, and the value of small pleasures. The home environment itself was adapted to support aging bodies. Chairs and benches were placed near fires or windows where sunlight warmed stiff limbs. Tools were arranged for accessibility. Herbs hung nearby for quick use. Baskets were kept at hand. Even the structure of the home reflected understanding. Low steps were avoided when possible, thick rugs cushioned uneven floors, and small stools allowed rest in between tasks. These adjustments were subtle, almost invisible, but they made daily survival manageable and preserved the dignity of those who had lived long and seen much. Work, though reduced in physical intensity, remained central. Elders continued to spin wool, mend garments, carve wood, or cultivate small gardens. Every movement was measured, every task adapted to the limitations of aging bodies. Imagine a grandmother sitting in a sunlit corner, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she weaves thread into cloth, humming softly, while her grandchildren watch, learning skill and patience in equal measure. The work itself was meditative, a rhythm that linked past and present, connecting generations through practice, tradition, and quiet endurance. The mental faculties of elders were often sharper than their bodies. They remembered events from decades ago with astonishing clarity. The rise and fall of local leaders, the arrival of traveling merchants, the feasts and famines that shaped their childhoods. They recounted these stories not as simple recollections but as lessons embedded in narrative, teaching patience, caution, and the consequences of choices. Their counsel was sought in disputes, marriages, and even matters of trade. An elder's memory was a living archive, invaluable in a society without widespread written records. Imagine a village council, young men leaning forward, ears attentive, as an old man speaks, his voice slow but confident, guiding decisions with wisdom born from experience rather than study. Religious observance framed much of their existence. Bells marked the hours, signaling prayer, labor, or rest. Elders attended services with devotion, not only for spiritual solace but also to maintain community ties. They taught prayers to the young, instructed them in rituals, and ensured that knowledge of sacred customs persisted. Even those unable to attend physically participated, whispering prayers by the hearth, lighting candles, or observing symbolic gestures within their home. Faith was woven into daily life, offering both structure and comfort, a companion through illness, fatigue, and the uncertainties of a world shaped by natural forces and human decisions. Social networks remained a lifeline. Neighbors often assisted with chores, shared food, and offered companionship. The elderly reciprocated with advice, storytelling, and small acts of care. Public spaces like village squares became theaters for observation and interaction. Elders watched festivals, processions, and markets with a discerning eye, noting behavior, teaching manners, and silently guiding the community's rhythm. Even quiet participation, sitting on a bench, observing, nodding, was a form of influence. Their presence stabilized the social fabric, reminding the young that continuity mattered, that the past informed the present, and that patience was a virtue to be learned through lived experience. Physical pain and disease were constant challenges. Arthritis, failing eyesight, and digestive troubles shaped their daily choices. Remedies ranged from herbal concoctions to charms and incantations. Some solutions worked, some did not, but the act of caring for the body, of maintaining routines and rituals, carried psychological weight as well. Pain could be endured when accompanied by purpose, when the body was guided by reason and the mind remained engaged. This resilience, subtle but profound, defined the elderly experience, differentiating mere survival from a life lived fully within its limits. And amidst hardship, moments of joy persisted. The laughter of children chasing one another across the courtyard, the warmth of the sun on stiff shoulders, the smell of bread rising from the oven, or the glow of candlelight reflected on stone walls. All these small pleasures were magnified by the awareness of time past. The elderly savored them, not as fleeting distractions, but as concentrated experiences of life's essence. Every smile, every shared meal, every word passed to a child was a thread weaving together memory, presence, and legacy. So, being old in the medieval Roman world was a complex tapestry. Pain and pleasure, limitation and influence, memory and observation intertwined. Elders were both witnesses and participants, fragile yet central, burdened yet respected. They navigated the daily realities of food, work, and social obligations while preserving the stories, traditions, and lessons that defined their communities. Their lives flowed like a quiet river, shaping the landscape of both people and culture, marking time not with grand gestures but with enduring presence, wisdom, and quiet resilience. The rhythms of life for the elderly were deeply tied to both the physical and social landscapes around them. The streets, fields, and homes were familiar, yet they held subtle changes each season that demanded adaptation. Imagine an old woman making her slow way down a narrow cobblestone street, her hands lightly brushing against the rough walls of houses, feeling the texture of time itself. She notices new cracks in the stone, a replaced door, or a freshly planted garden, each small detail recording the passage of years. These observations were not mere curiosity. They were ways to understand continuity and change, lessons in patience, and signs that life, though fragile, persisted beyond the limits of her own body. Food, as always, provided structure and comfort. Evenings were often spent preparing stews, boiling grains, or softening bread in wine or broth, tasks that demanded both care and memory. For many elders, the preparation of food was an act of both sustenance and storytelling. Recipes carried wisdom, passed down from parents to children, and subtly adapted over decades. An old man stirring lentils might recall the seasons when trade was scarce, when herbs were precious, or when families had to stretch a single loaf to feed many mouths. Every dish told a history, every bite carried memory. Meals also served as social rituals. Family members gathered, sharing news, recounting events, and exchanging advice, and the elderly were often at the center, guiding the flow of conversation and offering gentle corrections when needed. Work, though lighter, remained essential to identity and survival. The elderly continued to spin wool, mend garments, repair tools, or tend small plots of land. These activities were not simply for necessity. They were ways to maintain purpose, dexterity, and connection. Imagine an old man shaping wood with a worn knife, each movement deliberate and precise, as he teaches a grandchild how to carve simple tools. The process is slow, measured, and filled with patience, but it carries profound meaning. Skills honed over decades are transferred, ensuring that knowledge endures beyond the limitations of the aging body. Community remained a lifeline. Elders often acted as informal advisors, mediators, and storytellers, shaping decisions and social norms without demanding authority. In market squares or near communal wells, they observed, advised, and gently corrected younger members. Their presence carried weight. A simple nod, a remembered story, or a recollection of past events could settle disputes, teach caution, or offer guidance. Imagine a grandmother sitting with neighbors, quietly recounting a tale of a past harvest disaster, subtly reminding everyone of the importance of preparation and diligence. Through such stories, elders wove history into the fabric of daily life, their words carrying lessons not found in written records. Seasons continued to define existence. Winter brought particular challenges: frost, scarcity, and long nights that tested endurance. Fires became central, not only for warmth but for cooking and communal gathering. Elders guided younger family members in rationing food, preparing homes for cold nights, and protecting livestock. Yet even in these harsh months, small joys persisted. The warmth of a fire, the sound of a crackling hearth, and the quiet companionship of a child or a pet offered moments of solace. Spring, in contrast, brought renewal. Gardens sprouted, rivers swelled, and birds returned, signaling cycles that repeated for decades. Elders walked among new growth, taking satisfaction in life continuing despite hardships, teaching lessons about patience and resilience in subtle ways. Faith remained interwoven with everyday existence. Daily prayers, seasonal festivals, and small rituals framed the elderly's lives. Visiting chapels, lighting candles, and observing sacred practices were acts that combined devotion with social participation. Elders often instructed children in proper rituals, ensuring the persistence of spiritual knowledge. Imagine an old man guiding a young girl's hands to light a candle, murmuring words that have been repeated for decades, connecting generations through shared practice. In this way, faith provided both comfort and continuity, offering structure and meaning even when physical strength waned. Loneliness and vulnerability were constant companions, yet they were met with quiet endurance. Some elders lived alone, outlasting children or spouses. In these circumstances, animals, gardens, or the repetition of daily routines became vital for emotional stability. A cat curling in a sunbeam, a dog lying beside a hearth, or the careful tending of plants provided not only comfort but purpose. Even the simple act of observing the village from a doorway or watching children play in a courtyard was a reminder of connection, of life moving forward despite limitations. Storytelling remained central, not only for entertainment but as a mechanism of memory and influence. Elders recounted tales of wars, harvests, rulers, and travels, often embedding subtle lessons about human nature, morality, and survival. Imagine a group of children sitting cross-legged on the floor, listening intently as an old woman's voice rises and falls with the rhythm of the story, her hands gesturing to emphasize moments of suspense or caution. The stories captivated, educated, and connected, bridging generations and creating an enduring legacy. Pain and illness were constant threats, shaping daily choices. Stiff joints, failing eyesight, and chronic conditions required adaptation. Remedies were a blend of practical knowledge and traditional wisdom: herbs, poultices, rest, and sometimes charms or prayers. Despite discomfort, elders endured. Their ability to manage pain while maintaining engagement in daily life demonstrated resilience that was as instructive as any lesson they imparted verbally. The slow pace of life, combined with careful attention to health, allowed survival even in a world where medicine was limited and mortality was ever present. Through all of this, small joys illuminated their existence. A warm meal, a shared laugh, the smell of bread, a sunny courtyard, a child's hand in theirs, each moment was magnified by experience. Elders measured life not by grand achievements but by these concentrated, meaningful moments. They taught, advised, and observed, ensuring the persistence of culture, skills, and memory. Life in old age was not static. It was an active engagement with the world, framed by limitations but enriched by observation, reflection, and subtle influence. So, to be old in the medieval Roman world was to inhabit a space where endurance, wisdom, and observation intertwined. Elders navigated daily survival, maintained influence in family and community, preserved tradition and memory, and found moments of beauty and connection in a world that demanded resilience. They were witnesses to the passing of time, keepers of knowledge, and participants in life's rhythms, demonstrating that even in the twilight years, life could be full, meaningful, and quietly powerful. The passage of time for the elderly was marked not only by physical change, but by the constant flow of events in the world around them. Streets, marketplaces, and homes were alive with movement, and though their steps were slower, their attention was sharper than most. Imagine an old man leaning on a weathered cane, moving carefully along a winding road, eyes scanning for familiar faces, for unusual activity, for signs that something in the community had shifted. Every gesture, every sound, every fleeting expression was recorded in memory, creating a mental map of continuity and change. For elders, life was a careful observation of cause and effect, a constant evaluation of patterns learned over decades, and a quiet engagement with the pulse of society. Meals remained central to daily existence, and food was both sustenance and ritual. Bread, dense and coarse, was softened in broths, cheese was rationed, and meat was rare and precious. Stews simmered slowly over open fires, infused with herbs grown or gathered carefully. Elders often took the lead in preparing meals, using experience to stretch limited ingredients to feed large families. Cooking was also a form of storytelling. Each dish carried lessons learned over decades: how to preserve food, how to combine flavors, how to balance nutrition with scarcity. Imagine a grandmother teaching her grandchildren how to bake bread, each motion deliberate, each word a lesson, each moment a connection between past and future. Daily work continued, though adapted to the limitations of age. Elderly hands spun wool, repaired garments, carved wood, and tended small gardens. These tasks were more than labor. They were practices of continuity, resilience, and patience. Imagine an old man carving simple wooden tools, showing a child how to grip the knife safely, how to measure cuts with care, and how to take pride in each completed piece. The work was methodical and slow, yet it embodied the essence of survival, skill, and tradition. Each activity maintained purpose and ensured that knowledge would endure beyond the elder's lifetime. Community interaction remained a lifeline. Elders participated in conversations, advised families, mediated disputes, and offered guidance. In public squares, they observed markets, festivals, and gatherings, noting behaviors, teaching morals, and reinforcing social norms. Their presence was stabilizing. Even quiet observation shaped outcomes. Imagine a group of young men and women watching as an elder recounts a tale from a past harvest, subtly embedding warnings and wisdom within the narrative. These interactions were not formal or commanded. They were gentle, pervasive, and powerful in shaping the values and decisions of the community. The changing seasons defined the elders' routine. Winter brought challenges: bitter cold, scarcity of fuel, and long, dark nights. Fires were essential for warmth, cooking, and social gathering. Elders instructed younger family members in careful rationing, proper clothing, and protection of livestock. Spring brought renewal. Gardens sprouted, rivers swelled, and birds returned. Elders participated in planting, teaching patience and care, reminding younger generations that life persisted despite hardships. Autumn brought harvest, the culmination of labor and planning, and a time to reflect on survival, abundance, and the passing of another year. Each season was not only a practical concern, but also a rhythm that shaped perception, memory, and engagement with the world. Faith was interwoven with every aspect of life. Bells marked the hours, signaling prayers, work, or rest. Elders maintained rituals, guided children in proper observance, and preserved the traditions that connected generations. Chapel visits, candle lighting, and seasonal festivals offered solace, structure, and a sense of continuity. Even for those confined to their homes, prayer and ritual were vital, a way to participate in the spiritual life of the community. Imagine an elderly woman kneeling by her hearth, whispering blessings while observing the daily routine, her voice steady and comforting, her presence a reminder that faith and life were inseparable. Loneliness and isolation were ever-present challenges. Some elders outlived spouses, children, or close friends. Solitude could weigh heavily, yet it was often met with quiet resilience. Animals, gardens, and small routines provided comfort. A cat curled on a windowsill, a dog resting nearby, or the tending of herbs offered both companionship and purpose. Even the act of observing the village from a doorway or courtyard allowed elders to remain connected, participating in life through attention and engagement. The world moved around them, and their vigilance, patience, and awareness ensured they were still an integral part of it. Storytelling remained a vital function. Elders passed down knowledge, history, and moral lessons through narrative. They recounted events from battles, harvests, marriages, and disputes, often embedding warnings and wisdom. Children listened with rapt attention, absorbing not only entertainment but guidance and cultural memory. Imagine an old man seated by a fire, recounting a tale of a traitor who defied the rules of the community and suffered consequences. The details vivid, the moral subtle, and the lesson lasting. Through such stories, elders influenced behavior, reinforced social norms, and ensured that the memory of past generations remained alive. Physical pain and illness shaped daily routines. Arthritis, failing vision, and chronic conditions demanded care, adaptation, and patience. Remedies combined herbal knowledge, practical treatments, and rituals. Pain was endured with quiet determination, often softened by the structure of daily life, meaningful work, and the presence of family. The elderly learned to measure their effort, to pace themselves, and to find satisfaction in small accomplishments. Endurance became a defining feature, demonstrating resilience in the face of inevitable decline. And still, moments of joy persisted. The laughter of grandchildren, the warmth of sunlight, the smell of fresh bread, or the simple pleasure of a well-tended garden illuminated the days. The elderly experienced life intensely, understanding that even small joys carried profound significance. Each meal shared, story told, or quiet moment observed became a thread in the fabric of existence, connecting past, present, and future. Their lives, though constrained by age, were rich in memory, influence, and subtle beauty. Thus, being old in the medieval Roman world was a complex, layered existence. Elders navigated daily survival with care, engaged with family and community, preserved knowledge, and found meaning in observation, work, and storytelling. They were witnesses to history, guides to younger generations, and active participants in the rhythms of life. Their presence shaped the world around them, demonstrating that age, though marked by vulnerability, could also embody wisdom, dignity, and quiet power, enduring even as time carried all else forward. The mornings often began slowly for the elderly, marked by ritual and reflection rather than haste. Imagine an old man sitting on the edge of a straw-stuffed mattress, the first rays of sunlight filtering through a small window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. His joints ached from years of labor, yet he rose with a deliberate grace, each movement measured and intentional. He stretched his stiff limbs, flexing fingers and toes, feeling the tension slowly release with the rhythm of familiar motions. Breakfast was modest. Soaked bread, a few lentils, sometimes cheese, and occasionally a small portion of fruit preserved from the previous season. Every bite was chewed with care, each swallow deliberate, as if the act of eating itself were a meditation on survival and continuity. The streets outside were already alive with activity. Merchants arranged their stalls, children ran to school or errands, animals weaved between legs, and the distant sound of hammers and shouts marked ongoing construction or repair. For the elderly, these sounds were not noise but signals, each carrying information about the state of the community. A crooked fence might indicate negligence, A new roof suggested prosperity, and a child tripping on a stone reminded them of the constant need for attention and care. Their eyes were observant, their memory active, cataloging changes and patterns that others might overlook, and their minds constantly evaluated what was needed to guide or assist the younger generations. Work within the household remained significant, even for those whose bodies no longer permitted heavy labor. Elders tended gardens, maintained small plots of herbs and vegetables, repaired tools, and prepared meals with the precision of experience. Imagine an elderly woman kneeling by a patch of soil, her fingers carefully planting seeds, explaining to a grandchild the importance of spacing, sunlight, and timing. Every action was deliberate, every lesson embedded in motion, teaching patience, foresight, and attention to detail. Even seemingly simple tasks were imbued with layers of meaning, reflecting survival skills honed over decades. Food continued to play a central role in both sustenance and social cohesion. Meals were often communal, with family members gathering around a fire or shared table. Stews simmered over open flames, herbs were added with precision, and bread was dipped into broths or diluted wine to soften it for easier consumption. Elders frequently guided the distribution of food, ensuring fairness and moderation, while also imparting lessons about scarcity, gratitude, and resourcefulness. The act of eating together was more than nourishment. It was a ritual of connection, a reinforcement of social bonds, and a platform for storytelling, advice, and the subtle exercise of influence. Community interaction remained a cornerstone of life. Elders occupied a unique social space. They were neither fully in the labor force nor entirely passive observers. Their presence provided stability, guidance, and moral authority. In marketplaces, squares, and chapels, they engaged with others, offering counsel, sharing memories, and observing behavior. Imagine an old man seated near a fountain, recounting an event from decades past that echoes in current disputes, subtly steering decisions without overt command. Such interactions shaped the rhythm of communal life, reminding everyone of continuity, tradition, and the value of experience. The changing seasons continued to dictate daily routines. Winter brought cold, scarcity, and long nights, demanding careful management of fuel, food, and physical effort. Elders instructed families on rationing, protection from frost, and maintaining warmth through layered clothing and fire management. Spring and summer offered renewal and activity, planting, harvesting, tending livestock, and observing the growth of crops. Autumn brought reflection, preparation for colder months, and communal celebration of harvest. Each season required adaptation, planning, and attentiveness, and the elderly, with decades of experience, often guided these efforts, providing wisdom that ensured survival. Faith intertwined with daily life, offering structure, comfort, and connection. Elders participated in ritual, prayer, and observance of feast days, often instructing children and younger adults. Imagine an elderly woman kneeling in a small chapel, lighting candles with steady hands, whispering blessings that have echoed through generations. Her devotion was both personal and communal, connecting past traditions with present practice, providing comfort in illness, sorrow, and uncertainty, and reinforcing the rhythm of life within the community. Loneliness and isolation were ever-present realities. Not all elders had family nearby, and some had outlived friends and spouses. Yet solitude was mitigated through rituals, observation, and companionship with animals or small gardens. A cat resting in the sun, a dog lying by the hearth, or the careful tending of plants provided both purpose and comfort. Even observing the village from a doorway, watching children play, or noting the flow of daily activity created a sense of engagement, allowing elders to participate in life without direct interaction. Storytelling remained a vital conduit for memory and influence. Elders recounted events, offered moral guidance, and passed cultural knowledge to younger generations. These stories were never static. They adapted to circumstances, audience, and subtle social cues, Imagine a grandmother recounting a tale of a famine decades past, emphasizing lessons about preparation, generosity, and humility. Through narrative, elders shaped perception, behavior, and values, ensuring that knowledge endured beyond their physical presence. Pain, illness, and physical decline shaped daily experience but did not erase purpose. Chronic conditions required adaptation, care, and patience. Remedies combined herbs, practical treatments, and ritual observance. Elders learned to balance effort with necessity, to conserve energy for essential tasks, and to find satisfaction in incremental accomplishments. Endurance became a hallmark of character, demonstrating resilience to younger observers and quietly reinforcing the value of measured, thoughtful action. Amidst challenges, moments of beauty and joy persisted. The laughter of children, the warmth of sunlight, the scent of bread baking, or the gentle flicker of candlelight illuminated life's smallest pleasures. The elderly, attuned to time's fleeting nature, savored these moments deeply. Each smile, story, meal, or quiet observation became a thread in the tapestry of life, connecting generations and creating lasting meaning. Life in old age, though bounded by physical limitations, remained rich, purposeful, and quietly powerful. Mornings often arrived quietly, yet with their own rhythms, dictated by decades of experience and bodies finely attuned to the passage of time. An elder might wake to the muted crowing of a distant rooster, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, or the faint aroma of bread baking in a neighboring home, each signaling the start of another day. Rising from a straw mattress required careful attention. Joints stiffened from years of labor, muscles weakened, and bones ached in ways the young could scarcely comprehend. Every movement was deliberate, a dance between capability and necessity, and each step carried the unspoken awareness that time was both a teacher and a relentless companion. Breakfast remained modest but meaningful. Bread, softened in broth or wine, lentils, occasional bits of cheese or salted fish, and sometimes dried fruit formed the foundation of sustenance. Eating was never rushed. Each bite was deliberate, each swallow a quiet exercise in mindfulness. For many elders, preparing and consuming meals was as much about maintaining mental order and social continuity as it was about nourishment. Food offered comfort, ritual, and an opportunity to teach younger generations the subtle art of preparation, rationing, and appreciation for what was available. Imagine an old man carefully slicing a loaf, showing his grandchildren the precise method to portion each piece fairly, instilling patience, fairness, and respect through the act of sharing bread. Outside, the village or town hummed with activity. Merchants arranged wares on rough tables, children darted between legs, dogs sniffed and barked, and distant hammers marked the work of smiths and carpenters. For elders, every detail was noticed, cataloged, and remembered. They could tell who was new in the market, which tradesmen had fallen behind, and which families had recently faced hardship or fortune. Observation was not passive. It was an active engagement with the world, providing insight into the flow of social, economic, and familial networks. An elder might intervene subtly, offering advice, mediating disputes, or correcting misunderstandings, often without appearing to direct anything at all. Physical labor persisted, though adapted to the realities of aging bodies. Elders spun wool, repaired garments, tended gardens, or carved wood, each task conducted with careful attention. Work provided purpose, maintained dexterity, and served as a conduit for teaching. Imagine a grandmother kneeling in a garden, gently guiding a child's hands to plant seeds, explaining the timing, spacing, and care required for growth. The process was slow and methodical, yet profoundly instructive, instilling not only skills but also patience, respect for nature, and understanding of continuity. Work and education were inseparable in the elderly's approach to daily life. Meals also became moments of social connection. Families gathered around fires or simple tables, sharing sustenance and conversation. Stews bubbled over open flames, bread was softened for easier chewing, and herbs were added with the wisdom of experience. Elders frequently moderated conversation, offering reminders of tradition, fairness, and gratitude. Eating was not merely about nutrition. It was a ritual that reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and ensured that cultural and familial continuity remained intact. Imagine an old man speaking between bites, sharing tales of past winters, failed harvests, or clever solutions to scarcity, while young listeners absorb lessons hidden in narrative, laughter, and admonition. Community remained the stage for influence and observation. Elders occupied a position of subtle authority, offering advice, recollecting precedents, and mediating disputes. Their presence in marketplaces, chapels, or courtyards stabilized social norms and reinforced continuity. Imagine an elder recounting an event from decades prior, a simple story with nuanced guidance embedded, subtly shaping choices and behavior without overt command. Their memory of past successes and failures served as a living archive, invaluable in a society where written records were scarce and storytelling was central to cultural preservation. The seasons dictated daily rhythms and survival strategies. Winter brought cold, scarcity, and long nights, demanding careful management of resources, fuel, and warmth. Elders instructed families on layering clothing, preserving food, and tending fires to maintain health and comfort. Spring offered renewal with planting, gardening, and observation of natural growth. Summer brought activity, tending crops, and preparation for autumn harvests. Each season required adaptation, vigilance, and knowledge accumulated over decades. Elders' guidance ensured that survival was more than chance. It was the product of experience, foresight, and measured action. Faith intertwined with daily life, offering structure, solace, and connection to generations past. Chapel visits, candle lighting, and prayer were not only personal acts but community rituals. Elders guided children and adults alike in proper observance, ensuring the persistence of spiritual practice and communal cohesion. Imagine a grandmother kneeling by a window, whispering prayers, demonstrating gestures, and connecting the domestic sphere to larger religious rhythms. Faith provided comfort in illness, clarity in uncertainty, and a framework for understanding life's fragility and continuity. Loneliness was mitigated through observation, ritual, and the presence of animals or gardens. Cats resting in sunbeams, dogs lying near hearths, or the careful tending of herbs offered companionship and purpose. Even simply watching village life from a doorway or courtyard allowed elders to remain engaged, participating indirectly in social networks, yet actively shaping memory and culture. Their attentiveness to the world ensured that they were never truly isolated, even when physically alone. Storytelling remained central to identity and influence. Elders recounted events, moral lessons, and practical knowledge, shaping the values and behaviors of younger generations. Tales of famine, triumph, misfortune, or cleverness were delivered with nuance, often adapted for context and audience. Imagine an old man narrating a tale of traders defying local laws, embedding subtle warnings about greed, honesty, and vigilance. Through narrative, elders taught, advised, and preserved history, ensuring that wisdom outlasted individual experience. Pain, illness, and the gradual decline of the body were ever present, yet the elderly adapted with patience, resilience, and strategy. Chronic conditions demanded careful management, moderation of effort, and reliance on remedies, herbal, ritualistic, and practical. Every small accomplishment, every completed task, and every successfully navigated day became a testament to endurance and skill. Observers, particularly younger generations, absorbed these lessons, learning the value of patience, reflection, and quiet fortitude. Thus, to be old in the medieval Roman world was to navigate a complex tapestry of endurance, observation, and influence. Elders balanced vulnerability with wisdom, solitude with engagement, and daily necessity with reflection. They preserved history, shaped communities, and demonstrated through every deliberate step, story, and gesture that age, far from being a decline into irrelevance, could embody dignity, resilience, and profound impact on the lives around them. Amidst hardship, moments of beauty and joy illuminated existence. The laughter of children, warmth of sunlight, scent of fresh bread, or flicker of candlelight became treasures, magnified by awareness of time's passage. Each shared meal, story, and quiet observation contributed to a rich tapestry of memory and experience. Life in old age, though limited physically, remained full in purpose, influence, and observation, demonstrating that aging was not the fading of significance, but a profound engagement with the subtle currents of existence. Thus, being elderly in the medieval Roman world was a delicate balance of endurance, observation, influence, and reflection. The elderly navigated daily survival, participated in family and community life, preserved history, and shaped culture with quiet authority. Pain, fatigue, and solitude were ever present, yet purpose, memory, and connection ensured that life remained meaningful, rich, and enduring. Their presence was both stabilizing and instructive, a living bridge between past and future, showing that even in the twilight of life, influence, dignity, and quiet power remained.